Welcome to Microdose Psychedelic Insights, powered by the Conscious Fund. This is the PsyFi series, discovering the cutting-edge science and research in psychedelic medicine.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the PsyFi podcast, where I talk to industry leaders, clinicians, and experts to unravel the mystery that is psychedelic science. Today I'm here with Lucia Huang. I'm really excited to talk to her. She's the co-founder and CEO of Osmind. Thanks for joining us, Lucia.
Thanks, Gaurav. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. We've had a chance to talk a little bit, but I think it'd be great if you could, for our audience, just tell us a little bit more about yourself and what you do.
Sure, yeah. I'll give you the quick intro on Osmind and a bit of my background, and then go a bit deeper into Osmind. But we are a mental health psychedelic medicine startup based in the Bay Area. And our goal really is to lay the infrastructure and groundwork for novel mental health treatments like psychedelic medicine. So we have software that we provide to providers and therapists and doctors in the field that helps them better care for patients who are seeking out psychedelic medicines, and at the same time aggregates insights to help with research purposes. So I'll get a bit back to that later. But I'm very, very happy to be here today. In terms of my own background, as Gaurav mentioned, I'm co-founder and CEO of the company. And I've always been in the healthcare space my whole life, everything from studying chemistry during undergrad at Yale, all the way to a number of years of industry experience in healthcare. So I started out on the finance side and invested in a number of healthcare technology companies. And then most recently was running business operations at a neuroscience biotech startup. And that's where I really fell in love with the whole field and just saw that there's so much innovation that's just really on the cusp. And in the same way that, oncology was transformed in the last few decades by new types of medicine, by new modalities and sequencing, things like that, neuroscience is really undergoing the same revolution. And so when I was at business school a couple of years ago at Stanford, I met my co-founder, who was at the med school at the time, and we both bonded over our excitement for where neuropsychiatry is going, and also our shared mental health journeys, everything from being raised in households where it's highly stigmatized to having friends and family who've been severely affected by it, and are just really excited to be here to really build out the infrastructure to help this field succeed.
Oh, that's really fantastic. It's interesting to see all the different moving parts that are a part of the psychedelic renaissance, and obviously the drugs that need to be made, there's a therapy and the modalities, what that looks like. And then, of course, digital therapeutics and the infrastructure as far as software goes. And I think that's really, really exciting. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you got into all this, and then after that, maybe talk a little bit about Osmind and what you guys are, up to right now?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So as mentioned, I was working at a neuroscience biotech startup before, and the company was using AI for target discovery. So finding new genetic targets to better create smarter therapeutics that would help with neurodegenerative diseases, and really made me realize that there's just so much innovation, so much newness that's actually going on in psychiatry in a field that was really dead for a couple of decades. And so I began to follow the psychedelic medicine movement and had my own experiences with some of the medicines, and just realized that this could really transform the entire way that mental health works, rather than a patient having to take a pill every day, and that pill oftentimes doesn't even work well for them, or providers not knowing what works best for different people and the individual. We can actually come at it with a much smarter, much more data-driven approach of having therapies that are more curative in nature, and not just the pill that you take every day, and actually being able to target treatments based on an individual's background or medical history or demographics. So that's kind of what got me interested.
That's really exciting, because for the same thing, I think that really intrigued me is the evidence-based approach that we're finally taking. It's the efficacy of SSRIs and things of that nature are just so poor. And what's so fascinating about psychedelic medicine, I remember that Hopkins study that just came out saying that psilocybin was 4 times more effective. what it does, in the amygdala of the brain, like SSRIs usually reduce activity there, so they kind of shield you from negative emotions and the stuff.
Right, the anhedonia, right.
Exactly, and so then you'd have to keep taking that every day, because it's just a Band-Aid. They found with the psilocybin, it did the opposite, increased activity in that part of the brain. And it allowed patients to face those fears and then overcome them, and so you're right, it is curative in nature, and it's very exciting. And I look forward to drug policy aligning finally with science instead of being diametrically opposed to it. So yeah, that's all.
Completely.
Tell me a little bit more about Osmind and what you guys are up to right now.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with you. I think this is a paradigm shift that's underway, and it's really an all hands on deck movement. It's not just the drug companies like you talked about, it's policymakers, it's tech people, it's everyone really needs to get behind the effort. And so for us, we kind of see ourselves as doing the not as sexy work of building that ground layer infrastructure to allow the better development of therapies and the delivery of therapies too. And I think those are two really important pieces, and not everyone is focused on both. So in terms of the development, there are so many new therapies that are currently in the works, and there really is just a lack of data of how these therapies work in the real world. So for example, we have a ton of practices that we work with now as part of our electronic health record software. And we can aggregate information on how the therapies are working for different patients and be able to do things like help a biotech company better design a clinical trial. How can we subtype a patient population and predict the best response so that this drug has the best chance of getting to market and to helping as many people as possible. So I think on the development side, there's a lot of really interesting things that can be done with data. And then on the delivery side, in terms of the practitioners who are doing the hard work of actually treating patients, there's no software right now also that helps with that at all. And I think legacy software is meant for people who are trying to bill insurance for as much money as possible, or are meant for clunky, hospital systems, and nothing is nimble and suitable for the workflow now of practitioners who are in the psychedelic medicine field. So our electronic health record software is really meant to serve that. And we launched it last year, are serving about 160 practices around the country now. So the largest provider of software in this space by far, and really just helping to reduce those administrative burdens. I think a lot of these practitioners are going to have to face the American medical system as reality. And rather than running away from it or being scared of it, we want to make that easier for them. So dealing with how to see patients and manage them better, but also working with insurance companies and dealing with the FDA, REMS protocols. Those are all things that we're thinking about to help smooth out the delivery of these therapies.
Wow, that's amazing and so important, because there's just no way we can effectively go about this without having a very advanced and complex and sophisticated system to manage the data, And one of the things I think we talked about in a previous conversation is that I mentioned Epic, is what they're using right now. And so, how does your software and your program compare to that? Because, that's kind of the industry standard right now.
Yeah. Oh man, it's pretty different. Yeah. So Epic is it's the largest electronic health record. It's typically used in hospital settings, to your point. So if you've ever gone to a hospital or a big system like Kaiser or something, then your doctor is probably using Epic, and they're probably just staring at their computer and not actually looking at you when they're treating you and seeing you. So I think that's the number one thing, is that we're trying to make a system that's much more nimble and user-friendly and doesn't just suck away time from the provider and destroy the provider-client relationship. We actually want something that will supplement and bolster that. So one really unique part of our software is that there's an integrated patient engagement app as well. So it's not just on the provider side, but patients get a mobile app that they use throughout their whole care journey. And that allows them to journal and to reflect on their psychedelic treatments and experiences. It allows them to report outcomes back to their providers, so providers can track how they're doing and track the efficacy of their treatments. And it allows them to do administrative things too, like helping to get some level of insurance reimbursement for their therapies.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I like how you talked about how this will connect the patient and the doctor more than having the doctor just stare at a screen, because that really a relationship is really important, and anything we can do to facilitate a better connection there, I think is really important and imperative. So that's great.
Yeah.
I'd love to know what you're most excited about moving forward, in this industry right now.
Oh my gosh, so many things. I think what we are really excited about is the convergence of psychedelic medicine, which I think a lot of people still feel is somewhat fringe, with like mainstream psychiatry. And I think we're seeing more and more that the fields are colliding and that psychedelics are becoming mainstream and part of clinical care delivery. I think a lot of traditional healthcare, like say, the APA, like Psychiatry Association, like don't officially endorse ketamine, for example. And there's a lot of politics that goes in that, but the more evidence that we can show, the more data that we can collect, the more we can prove and wash away the stigmatization. So I'm really excited for that to start to unravel. And I think with MAPS completing its phase 3 trial soon, obviously Compass and a lot of other companies focused on psilocybin, like these are only just going to become part of like sort of a practitioner's clinical arsenal. And I'm really excited to see that just be the norm rather than something that's kind of like weird or out there.
It's really cool. So the data that you're going to be collecting and the way you're going to be using it goes well beyond just facilitating a good relationship between doctor and patient or understanding pathologies better. We're talking about reducing stigma and even changing public policy. So that's some pretty meaningful and powerful stuff that you're
Yeah, it's not the easiest. Like, for example, actually just earlier this week, we announced the launch of a task force that we're on to help with insurance coverage of ketamine. So folks might know ketamine is an FDA-approved anesthetic. So it's been around for many decades, used in the operating room. But just a couple of decades ago, people started to realize that it's effective for mental health and pain conditions as well. So it's been used off-label and like has shown to be like highly effective in patients who have, especially those who have failed multiple conventional therapies. And so you're seeing a lot of practices pop up that are really helping patients that have not found help before at all. But unfortunately, insurance companies don't cover it because it's considered experimental use. It wasn't officially FDA approved for depression or for chronic pain or anything like that. And so it's just extremely expensive. Like just to get one infusion or one ketamine-assisted psychotherapy session costs $500 or more upwards of just, an hour of time. So it's extremely burdensome on the patient. And we're part of this effort to help with the real world analysis of ketamine clinics that we work with to help anonymize and aggregate data and to actually prove to Medicare that this is something worth covering, because no pharma company now is going to touch ketamine, racemic ketamine. They're not going to run a clinical trial on it because there's no IP around it. But we're hoping that like with the data that we can collect, we can show Medicare that this is something that desperately needs to be covered to help patients and to make things more affordable.
That leads me to a couple of questions, or a comment and a question. I totally agree about the ketamine thing. I think it's been the Trojan horse for psychedelic medicine, because it's already been in clinical practice for 50 years or more.
Right.
We know it's safe. We've been using it in practice. And now all of a sudden, hey, it has these psychedelic properties, and it helps patients in this sort of setting where we can imagine or visualize adapting that similar setting to other psychedelic substances as well.
Right, right.
Ketamine has definitely played a fascinating role in that regard. And I guess the question I have for you then is, what about Spravato? Are insurance companies covering that?
Oh, man. Yeah, that's a really great question. That's a thorny one. Yeah. So for those who don't know, Spravato is it's S-ketamine. So it's the an enantiomer of ketamine, like part of racemic ketamine. And Johnson & Johnson was able to get novel IP around that because it's considered a different molecule. So it was approved 2 years ago as actually the first new class of antidepressant in many decades, which is exciting. But the controversy is that many people don't think it's as effective as racemic ketamine, but because it's considered a new molecule, then insurance companies will actually cover it. So they are covering it. I think it's been a bit slower of a rollout than Johnson & Johnson had hoped, but they are covering it. I think, it is tough because you have racemic ketamine as such a powerful alternative. And because of our nuances of the healthcare system, it's harder to get insurance coverage. But I still think that Spravato being out there is a good thing because it is paving the way for future psychedelic therapies. And it's showing like the mainstream that it's okay that this drug has dissociative effects. It's not scary. It's a good thing. It's actually like potentially has healing powers given the neuroplasticity. So I think in terms of just breaking down the barriers, it's still good that it's as out there and it's getting covered by insurance. And I can only hope that the same thing happens with racemic ketamine and future psychedelic therapies as well.
Absolutely, especially ketamine infusions, because as effective as Spravato may be for acute suicidality and patients with severe depression,
right?
Bioavailability is a tricky thing with ketamine, and you really can't beat 45-minute to an hour-long infusion in an office. It's IV, where you just get the full dose. So you don't have to worry about how much gets up your nostril or the lozenges or whatever. There's a lot of different ways, and we find that we're struggling with that. And so it's tough. It's tough to be like, to understand that, well, this medicine may work for a lot of people, but we have all these hoops to jump through, as far as regulation and insurance being one of the biggest, before we can really help people get access. And so I guess we talked a little bit about this, but it seems that, the way that you're gathering data and then the robust method in which you're doing it is really going to help facilitate that process and hopefully make it go faster.
Yeah, I think so. I think, insurance companies really care about outcomes, and we have to show them on a large scale that these things really work better than SSRIs. And so someone's got to be out there to be collecting that data. So I think we're in a good place to do so because we work with the largest number of psychedelic practices in the country.
Yeah, wow, that's really fascinating. Okay, maybe I should have asked this before. I asked you what you were excited about in the future, but I'm curious, for how long you've been in the field, how have you seen things change? And what's been some of the biggest changes that you've seen, both in your field as far as digital therapeutics, but also just in the world and society in general?
Oh, man. Yeah, I think it's really interesting, what the whole world has gone through with COVID and how that's changed our healthcare system quite a bit. And I think this kind of really makes me think about, like, how is it that we make a lasting impact? Because I think there have been two trends that have jumped out at me over the last, say, half year, a year or so. I think one is, I think they both kind of revolve around hype. I think there have been a lot of new businesses that have popped up in healthcare that have really taken people by storm, but I question how lasting and durable they are. So, for example, companies providing like telemedicine, talk therapy, like really important. I think, the more mental health companies, the better these days. But like, what's going to happen after COVID when people probably want to go back to see their therapist in person? And does it make sense for these companies to be raising hundreds of millions of dollars to address a patient population that, again, it's important, but it's kind of really just the tip of the iceberg. So right. I think that's one thing that I've been thinking about a lot. And as it relates to psychedelics, I think we kind of see a similar trend of there's been a lot more interest in the past year or so from traditional Silicon Valley and the mainstream. Peter Thiel is really interested now in the field, and Compass had a really successful IPO. And again, all that is great. I think this is really important, but I think we also have to think deeply about like what is going to make a lasting impact in this field, right, and that can survive beyond just an initial wave of interest.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we're doing a lot of things, we are doing a lot of things differently this time than we did in the 60s and the 70s when we tried to make this happen. And Sandoz was just giving away acid for free to everybody, I think the clinical approach that we're taking is really important. I personally do believe there is room for psychospiritual growth and for people that don't have necessarily have mental health challenges to be able to use these medicines to expand or grow their consciousness or spirituality, whatever. But I think for right now, it's really important that we're taking the approach we are, and that we are focusing on the medicalization of these drugs. And it's interesting. I write a column every month for Microdose called Psychedelics versus Cannabis. So it's always
interesting.
Yeah, it's always interesting to draw those parallels.
Yeah.
I think there's a combination of things. The entourage effect of cannabis made it very difficult to isolate one compound, like THC alone. Marinol wasn't that effective, and I guess CBD was the only one. Now we finally have like Epidiolex, but otherwise we don't have a good understanding of the endocannabinoid system. It's still not taught in medical school really, and so what are we going to do with it? Versus we do have a very good understanding of the serotonin system, and these drugs, even though, for example, mushrooms have so many alkaloids, you can take the psilocybin out, make some synthetic psilocybin, and still get amazing. So from a nerdy pharmacological standpoint, I think that's really interesting as well,
Yeah.
But that's really cool. We're kind of drawing towards the end here, and I wanted to ask you. I give everyone in my audience the last word. If you have a message, if you have a comment or something you wanted to share with everybody, I would love for you to do that. But the mic's all yours.
Yeah, let me think on it for a couple of seconds.
Sure.
Yeah, I think kind of along the previous point of sort of building lasting impact. We're trying our best to do that, and time will tell if we are able to. I think from a personal level, definitely encourage everyone to really think about lasting impacts. And I talk to so many people who are in more conventional industries and who are really passionate about psychedelic medicine and are just about there to take that leap of faith and to dive head in. And I would just encourage people to totally do that. I think this is a trend and a wave that's not going away with psychedelic medicine converging with mainstream mental health and psychiatry. And we really need all the brightest minds out there to help. And I think thinking about the sort of underlying infrastructure of how to do that is important. Obviously biased because we at Osmind are trying to do that, but how can we make sure that we can enable everyone else in psychedelics to really do their best work? How can we provide the data? How can we help practitioners? How can we help patients access these therapies? These are just really tough, burning questions. And I would challenge everyone to kind of think more holistically and multidimensionally about how best to make an impact.
Wow, that was a really great message. I'm surprised you came up with that on the spot. That's really incredible.
You inspired me, Gaurav.
It's a two-way street, Lucia, for sure. Hey, if people want to learn more about you, people want to learn more about Osmind, where can they go? How can they do that?
Yeah, great. Yeah, our website is osmind.org, osmind.org. We are a public benefit corporation, hence the .org, and hence a lot of our focus on social impact and public access to these therapies. So that's something that I'm always happy to talk about on a one-on-one basis. I think one of the best decisions we ever made was purposely allowing ourselves to consider public benefit as part of our mission. But yes, osmind.org is where to find us. And you can always email me to lucia@osmind.org.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Lucia, for joining me. I'm so glad that we finally got to connect and have this great conversation. I'm sure it will be our last, and I look forward to having you on the show again. Observing the success that you're having at Osmind, it's really exciting, and we're all just really hopeful and excited that people like you are doing what you're doing, so we can take healthcare and just improve ourselves, and take it all to the next level. And that's what you're doing. I think that's really exciting.
Thanks, Gaurav. I appreciate that. Thank you for giving so many of us a voice.
Oh, my pleasure. Well, have a great time, Lucia. And thank you so much, everybody. This is another episode of the PsyFi podcast, where we talk to leading industry clinicians, experts, and leaders to unravel the mystery that is psychedelic science. I was joined today by Lucia Huang, the co-founder and CEO of Osmind. You can find the show on Spotify, iTunes, and YouTube. Please leave a review. That would be fantastic. And we'll see you all next time. Thank you.
Thanks for joining the PsyFi series, brought to you by Microdose and the Conscious Fund. Visit our website at www.microdose.buzz.